This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. G'day everyone, welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name's Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to be your host on this journey of what won't be basket casey goodness today. It'll be a little bit different. We're taking a journey through student leadership today and the establishment of the Southern Hemisphere's, or I'm going to say the universe's most newest student union. So I'd like to welcome two very special guests today. Firstly, Richard Martino from the brand new Western University Student Union. Welcome, Richard.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
An absolute pleasure. And of course, Nathan Butcher from CPR Group, who was instrumental in helping the work that we did with Richard and WSUSU. Welcome, Nathan.
Good morning.
First time for you, isn't it, Nathan? First time on the podcast?
It is the first time, a year and a half, wondering what I've been doing wrong not to get on here earlier.
Well, we'll see. It's always important if you get invited back. So this has actually been a really interesting project for us. And where I want to start the conversation is that, we're talking about this new student union or a student union for the modern world. So, Richard, I want to kind of pick your brains a little bit here and see, what does a modern student union mean to you? What does that term mean?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Michael. Look, I think it probably means lots of things, but I think it really probably depends on the context as well, like the area that you're sort of operating in. I think for us at Western, a modern student union, I think is something that caters to the demographic of students that we have at Western. And I think that demographic is always constantly shifting. I think clearly we've got lots of students that are very, very busy. They're working a lot. They've got a lot of carer responsibilities. So their levels of engagement are probably not what I would recall as my time as a student. I just don't think they've got that sort of time anymore. I mean, you've always got some students that want to engage on that level. So I think a modern student union should be providing lots of different options for students to engage in different ways. And I think that whole digital ecosystem is as well, I think is super important. I think COVID, in my view, sort of really showed us, well, certainly in our experience, was that there were students that were engaging during COVID when we were doing digital or online engagement that we had never seen before. So particularly parents, we did a lot of like cooking classes and stuff where we cooked together online in our kitchens. And that was really wonderful to sort of see engagement from those students that had never really engaged with the services and functions of, well, I mean, at that point it was within the university, but of services that would traditionally be within a student organization. So I think that's probably the first part. Look, I would say also the representative structures also need to be modern and relevant to students in terms of how they want to engage. I think it's really interesting, right? Like, I think we very much hang on to these very traditional ideas of what student representation and student leadership look like. I think there's a place for some of that, but I think, again, like a lot of that's shifting because the time and the energy that students have to commit to leadership and representative roles is changing. And then what you'll often see is the same faces in the room because they're the ones that have got the time to sort of to do those traditional representation and leadership roles. So again, we did something very interesting some years back. We worked with the New Democracy Foundation and we did a student or what is usually called a citizens panel or a citizens jury, but we did it with students. And we got them to answer this one question, which was, what does good student voice look like at the university? And I think that that's very clearly came through is that for the general run-of-the-mill students that don't have a lot of time, there needs to be mechanisms for them to be able to interact with decision-making on at a time that's convenient for them. That might be midnight, right? Like, it just really depends. So again, like, I think it's really important for student unions to sort of be able to provide mechanisms for students or advocate for universities also to provide mechanisms for students to have that voice in decision-making that's convenient for them.
There's a lot of that sounds like you mentioned the lessons learned from COVID, and it sounds like a lot of that new way of engaging is going to stay in the new union.
Look, I hope so. And again, look, I think it will evolve as well. I think each year the demographic of students is slightly changing, but I think it's incumbent on student unions and universities, I think generally, to sort of have their finger on the pulse with how that's changing and how they can do better to engage students.
Great. Nathan, I'm going to put the same question to you, but maybe with a bit of a twist. So the modern student union approach that Richard's just unpacked for us, how do you think that differs from a traditional student union model? And the three of us went to university in a very different time to now. I think that this era is extremely different. And we've talked about the concept of lived experience and how the three of us can't really sit here and say we have lived experience of a modern student because we have experience of when we were students and compulsory student unionism and the differences of traditional student unionism and what student services looked like back then. So what are your thoughts on that, Nathan?
I think it's certainly around the services that student unions now provide. The the food, the security work that they do, the support, the engagement, the work with the quality. Certainly, when I was back at uni the first time around, we didn't have such a focus on those key elements. A lot of it was more about bringing us together, having fun, and enjoying each other's company. Whereas very much now there's a real common thread across all the across the entire university sector, where there's a great deal of care for the individual, their circumstances, and it's about bringing everybody up so that they're able to engage well at university and engage well in their life in and around university. So I think it's changed quite a lot since I was at university, but for the better. You certainly see a great deal of care from everybody in the sector and real engagement about what is fair, what is equitable, what can we do to support. So regardless of the backgrounds of people, there is that commonality running through the entire sector.
Mm. One of the things that really that I'm reminded of about this project, different from so many other projects that we've worked on, is the level of transparency that Western Sydney University went into, and that was a really important part of the whole project. So, and I think the fact that we have been able to talk openly about the project in public forums, like through Student Experience Network and with other associations, but even more importantly, with those people who were employed at the university to run student services who would move over to the union, who, as staff, they've got concerns that we wouldn't necessarily see on the surface when we're dealing with student leadership concerns. So the level of transparency on this project was, I think I used the word refreshing. So, Richard, I'm interested in your thoughts on that transparency and how that felt from the inside, and if my experience of that transparency being an anomaly was shared by you and the team internally.
Yeah, again, another really good question. And I mean, I can only talk about, I mean, obviously you've got the experiences of other, processes that are happening at other institutions. I can only really speak to Western. Look, I think certainly, I think us being at the helm of a lot of that transition, I think, transparency and accountability is something that we hold as pretty core values, would be my view. And I think to some extent too, like I've been reflecting on this process a little bit more as someone that came from student organizations into the university. So I was the last general manager of the student union before those functions came into the university. I've always sort of seen my role as sort of a bit of a caretaker. At some point, those services and functions would go back out when the time was right, and obviously that time is now. So I think that, and I think, not just my view, but I think that view was supported throughout the university's leadership, particularly our Vice Chancellor, George Williams, who's fantastic and very much, I think, an advocate for student organisations. I think as someone that I think he was involved in student organisations when he was a student. So I think there's real benefit to everyone being on the same page within the university's structure, but at the same time also a level of trust that we are implementing in an appropriate way as well. So I think that those two things were in my view, really, really key. And really positive. Like I've been through this process at our institution before, where there's been less consultation or more agendas in terms of what the outcome may be. And I think we were purely operating with like what is the best model that we can give to students to set this organization up for success. And I think you're right, that is very refreshing and probably pretty rare.
Definitely. And I love that starting point. What's best for students? And look, we'll no doubt the conversation will come back to the relationship with the university that I think in this case was, again, refreshingly positive. But that's probably enough of some of the existential part of the conversation. Let's get into the situation before and walk through what we actually went through for the establishment of the union. So, can you unpack for us the nature of the student services at Western Sydney University prior to the work that we'll now hand over to the union? But you've already touched on a bit of that history. So, what got us to that point as well?
Yeah, so like I said, so the functions of the former, like the last student organization came into the university 2011. So they've been sitting in the university for a long time, 15 odd years. And look, I think they've grown in leaps and bounds, probably because of the viewpoint that I bring to a lot of those functions. And like I've maintained that whole student-centered approach and getting student voice at sort of the core of the way that we develop, design, implement. So it's very much this philosophy of co-designing with students. And I think that's sort of been at the forefront of a lot of the success that we've had with the programs that we've sort of implemented and sort of have sat within our student community team. So prior to the transition over, what sat within student community would be what you would call bread and butter or traditional student union or student organization functions, with probably the exception of commercial services. So that obviously sat within the commercial side of the university. But again, students had a lot of input often into those processes where they were doing tenders and reviewing of potential vendors for delivery of particular commercial services. Students were involved in a lot of that. Could that be better? Probably, but at least it was something. But yeah, certainly within student community. So we had obviously the student voice and student representation functions, campus life, student club, sport. And then we also had some student leadership programs that we were sort of running within there. And interestingly, a team which we called Inclusive Communities. But really, that was really interesting. I think it might be worth some time reflecting on. We did a lot of work around how a lot of that had to do with the staff that we have within that team. We've got this fantastic guy called Daniel Jantos, who was he used to be our chaplaincy coordinator. We changed that title really with a view of how can we create a team that provides this holistic pastoral care of students, which is not just about secular chaplaincy services, which should be part of what a university provides, but provides more this umbrella support across the whole institution, right? And then really pairing that up with a lot of our food security sort of work as well. So we started this whole program of community dinners, and that's where it all started. It started at one campus. We trialed doing these community dinners where it was Daniel and the team and some volunteers sort of running it with, again, alongside students. And often students would bring their parents and friends and whatever else on the campus and cook, right? And it was this whole idea of creating community and pastoral care, and using that as a starting off point to sort of have conversations with students around how they were going, what support they might need. Yeah, it was really great. So that was the Inclusive Communities team. That grew obviously then into doing things like our Diversity Fest and a lot of our diversity and inclusion and belonging work, really. So that was that team. And I think that's pretty much it. Obviously, we've got our Western Life platform, which again might be worth some time considering. But look, I think most student unions are sort of going down that path of looking at platforms and how that's important. But we've really tried to leverage digital platforms as a way of being able to, I guess, track engagement across various programs and then be able to build dashboards and looking at impact on retention, which is, again, I think a really important thing that universities are looking at right now. Retention across the board, but also often universities look very traditionally at the classrooms and how the academic experience influences retention, which it does do, but how does non-academic engagement impact retention? It's not something that I think university leaderships often think about, but it significantly impacts retention. And we can see that now, like through our Vice Chancellor, very much talking about Like he can see firsthand the role that our food security programs have, our clubs, our sport, and I think slowly but surely university leadership are catching on that stuff's really important, and being able to track and engage what that impact is having, I think is really important.
That link, but with the university and students and the student services provider is so important. And it's one that, look, to be perfectly honest, the reason that we do the work that we do in this sector is because we believe that we can leave it a little better than we found it. And the legacy that I would hope to leave, the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal for us in this is if we can walk away from the sector at some point knowing that universities and student unions, student associations, student guilds are better aligned than they are on average across the sector, then that would warm my heart. Now, the reason that I say that is as a student, I was probably a bit oblivious to sometimes the differences between the union and the university. I started uni when I was 17, so it was foreign to me. Although I was somebody who enjoyed governance, it was kind of foreign to me because I'd never been exposed to that. Now it's really clear, and what bugs me about the sector is how many of our clients have a university that is almost deliberately working against them, or at least that's how it feels. We have so many cases where we see universities trying to cut funding, cut services, or force student associations to do more with less without providing any of that underlying understanding that exactly what you said. It's often everything that exists around the pure education of going to university that keeps people at uni and sets them up for success, regardless of the degree, sets them up for success as human beings on the planet. So that connection that and you mentioned the fact that George is really supportive as a VC, that's maybe unfortunately rare. How has that felt, that relationship to you, and the way that I'm explaining what we see as a negative experience in many across the sector? How's that for you, and what sort of connection would you advise people to do, or what's the in that you would advise people to do to get that connection going better?
Yeah, it's again really good question. Look, and it's tricky. Like I think it's complex. I think, clearly for our story, it was I think George was pretty much on board from day one. Like I think he came in with that mindset, so that helps, right? Like, but again, like being able to show data, like I think is really, really important to show the impact. So if you don't have that data and you're not set up to do it, it makes things trickier. Um, Having said that, right, like you need to be able to get it in front of the right people. I mean, universities are not homogenous places. Yes, there's often, people at the top that are making a lot of decisions, but if you can get it in front of the right people, and then you can maybe find advocates for your work at some point in the university's leadership structure, then that's probably a bit of a win as well.
If you could provide guidance to somebody else who's
Yeah,
listening to this saying, "Oh my God, I'm so annoyed at the struggle that we've got trying to get any connection with the university so they appreciate the value of what we do
yeah,
and treat us as we're both working with the same customer base. So if we worked in a more symbiotic relationship than an adversarial relationship, that would be so much better." What's a pathway that they can take to get to a situation like you've been enjoying for the last few years?
yeah. So I think that what I just said, I think the other thing too, right? Like a lot of it is probably context too. I think historically student organizations have had a, antagonistic relationship with university leadership based on the activism work that they may be doing. I Look, it's again, I think we're pretty unique here at Western in that, I mean, we've done a lot of that too. Like I was an activist in my past. I've done my share of occupying, university administration buildings and all that sort of stuff. But I feel like we always had a very respectful relationship with university management in that I think that they understood that we were there for the right reasons and that we were always respectful of them. Like our role is to do this and we're going to fight for it, but at the same time, we're going to be respectful in the way we do that. Again, you can't always control the way that students are going to do that sort of work. And that can, I think, significantly impact the relationship that the organization will have with university management. But that's certainly the way that I try and advise students to do that sort of activist or advocacy type work. That if you burn that bridge with the university, it's really hard to repair it, and you need to have it's a symbiotic relationship at the end of the day. So you can't you got to maneuver correctly in terms of the way that you need to be a strong voice for students, but at the same time you need to maintain that relationship. So whether that's, someone in the organization has maintained that relationship while the others are off doing, crazy things, that's at least if there's some thought to that, I think. Yeah, sorry.
I often find that it's the word respect really helps, and
Yeah.
the analogy play the ball, not the player. So sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we need to get mobilized to hold a university to account for what we see as decisions that are not in the best interest of students. If you take action based on the way that I just framed that, then you can have respectful discussions. Those discussions can be heated and robust. They can include the activism, so long as they're happening in a way that, as you say, doesn't burn the bridge. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be an understanding that student organizations need to be professional bodies, right? Like, so part of being professional is that level of respect. But I think beyond that too, like if I was going to say something else, it's about, look, I think also a lot of goodwill that I've seen over the years where goodwill has been burnt between student organizations and the universities where students do, unethical sort of things. So again, like really good governance and good controls in place, I think really is important in terms of, again, maintaining that relationship and reducing risk around sort of students doing, running off with money and doing all those sorts of crazy things, which, we do have, there is that history in student organizations that we have to acknowledge and be aware of. And again, structure things in such a way to minimize those risks as much as we can.
Including training from the outset, saying these
Absolutely.
are the sorts of things we've seen people do in the past. Maybe don't do them because we don't want you in jail. So, Nathan, kind of as the resident expert in putting these sorts of models together, I think that it's probably time to unpack where we've landed. So, can you walk us through the nature of the model, it kind of just structurally to begin with, but then I'm interested in it for you to unpack where some of the surprising, oh, I was going to say surprising challenges, but where are the good things that happened and some of the surprising challenges that came up as we went through the process?
Look, I'll start with the positives, and the positives are all the internal interactions. So as we've spoken about the relationship between the university, the SRC, and stakeholders within within the union as we were putting it all together, we were able to bring a lot of different thoughts, a lot of people from different backgrounds together to a single approach to how to go about the engaging or becoming a union. Through the constitution process, there was differing experiences with what a constitution would look like, what it means, what it should cover, and what it should result in. And we're able to bring people with very different experiences, backgrounds, expectations, and bring them all together and create a single document that will lead the union forward over the next couple of years. That will change over time as things change and as the experiences within the university changes and as the world changes. But they have a very, very strong document there that will help guide for the future. And because that was done in such a way where it was transparent and open and everyone's views were listened to, we now have something that holds and binds everyone together. And I think that's been incredibly important to get to that stage. It did take some time to get there, but that's what good process is. It's about listening. It's about bringing people together. It's about really unpacking people's thoughts, because what I've found in this process is that everyone cares, but everyone does have that the bit of value that you can add to the process. So you think you've got it all covered. You think you've got this beautiful document. Everything is there, and then you have this one conversation with somebody, and they turn it not on its head, but they add a different dimension to it, of which strengthens that document and takes things forward in the right direction. So that was truly fantastic. It was great to have a board that's mixed between students or student-led, so that the majority of the board are students, but then there's the support of external expertise on the board as well, and a university representative. So having all that together removes all those risks we were just talking about before, builds that relationship, and gives the avenue for for all the stakeholders to come together and have meaningful discussions and a meaningful approach going forward. So that was one of the positives amongst a whole range of it. I say Richard as well having been in the sector for such a long period of time and has such expertise, has masterfully guided the process through as well. So big congratulations to Richard and the SRC and the students that were involved in that process. Our challenges, funnily enough, were outside of that group. It was working with, or maybe I won't mention the bodies here, but it was working with with the government itself to try and get the machinations of the organisation up and running. So business names and registrations and so forth. The hundreds of hours of calls with government departments trying to get things registered and put together were some of the biggest challenges that we held. But it certainly wasn't the engagement. In fact, the engagement was fun. It was engaging and very meaningful.
And I like how you touched on the fact that it's not always without challenge, because somebody will say, "Oh, what about this?" But because of the transparency built into the process and the openness that we were able to have those conversations right from the start, it meant that the result was better. It was okay. That's a really interesting point of view. These are the places that we can work that in. How does that work? So that collaborative approach that we went through was really helpful. So Richard, tell us where we landed. Give us a summary of what the picture now looks like for the union.
Yeah, and look, what I might do is just take a step back to coming back to your earlier question. I didn't really talk about that whole process in terms of how we did that transition, and really, it's coming back to Nathan's point. It's been a long process, really, and I think that's actually important to sort of to note and to like you can't rush these things, right? Like I think that's like often we're in a situation where we're having to respond to and that's not a good thing. Like I think we had clearly at Western, there was already a push from the SRC, probably about 12 months before or maybe even slightly longer than that, before the government announced the legislative changes that would require student organisations to have 40% of staff. So we had already started that process, and really it was trying to get buy-in from the senior leadership of the university, including the Vice Chancellor, but then engaging you guys in actually doing a piece of work, which is to let's have a look at the sector, both in Australia. Let's have a look at what they do overseas, because I think that's often something that we don't do as well. Is where is the innovation happening in student organisations, and we clearly did that piece of work with you guys leading that, and then to sort of have a recommended model, and then obviously with the implementation. So where we've landed, and I think Nathan's sort of touched on that, sort of starting at that board level, is a board that's whilst the majority, it's a mix of both students, university staff, and external. And the idea being is as those externals will sort of add to the skill set and knowledge gaps that exist with the staff and the students. The SRC, or the student voice model, it's I think we've landed on something now, but it's essentially what we're looking at is an elected SRC executive, but then it's a relatively small SRC by industry standards. I think we've got 9 members of the SRC, and that's done intentionally. And that, again, my view as someone that's been involved in student voice and student representation for a long time, often we can create these really big SRC, like there's a focus on having these really big SRC. Everyone wants to be on SRC because that's the mechanism for student voice. I think it's really about changing the mindset around how do we do student voice. And in my view, it should be more organic and grassroots in the way that we involve students. So rather than involving them in formal SRC roles where they're often caught up in red tape. And this is sort of some of the conversations I was having with students of that, we're activists. We want to get involved. Well, if you want to be an activist, you need to be on SRC to sort of do that work. You probably don't. You need access to resources. You need access for, other things to do, campaigning and things like that. You don't actually need, you just need support, right? So really that SRC structure is really more around sort of having some subcommittees of SRC or committees of SRC that, talk to our diversity, equity and inclusion work. Our campus structure, which is a very big, we've got multiple campuses. So ensuring that we've got that good cross-section of voice across our campus network, and that we're identifying issues that are happening on specific campuses. And then we've also got there was another one which I've forgotten now, but again, the whole idea is really trying to get that grassroots involvement. And those representatives that go onto the SRC from each of those bodies, they're not elected by general students; they're actually elected by those bodies. And again, that show, like in my view, that's important in terms of that grassroots voice in nominating those people. And at any point, if they're not doing a good job of representing the views of those grassroots bodies, then they can be removed and someone else can be put in instead. So that's the sort of, I guess, the formal structure. And then in terms of service delivery and functions, again, very similar to the work that student community was doing. So the idea is that the student union will continue with the campus life student engagement sort of work, which also includes our student clubs, which is a very big part of that in terms of students co-designing and delivering campus experience alongside the student union. Food security, well-being and representation, so those student voice functions and supporting those structures that we just talked about and our student collectives, and then also our food security program as well. And then also another big part of the growth and the direction which the student union will be going is around student advocacy. So there was some of that within student community, but I think the idea is that needs to grow, particularly now that we've got an independent body that's separate from the university to provide that function. The idea is that we'll continue to grow that function going forward. So that's, I guess, a new frontier for the student union is sort of to go into that space and do a little bit more work around individual student advocacy. Yeah.
Could that have been that student advocacy part there at the end? Do you think that could have been one of the triggers that meant that the SRC was already considering a shift before the legislative changes you mentioned? Was it that we really want this to be independent so we can have that advocacy outside?
No, I don't think it really was actually. I mean, it was from our end of staff, like because and again, we've got the history and the context to know. This is often the thing with students, right? They only know what their experience has been for 2 years or whatever else. I've got the history of 25 years, well, actually 30 if you include all my years as a student. So 3 decades so I've seen like all the various models that we've had around advocacy. So we can see where good advocacy can actually really improve the experience and outcomes for students. Whereas I think as a general student, you probably won't have that knowledge or experience. So I think from the SRC's perspective, it was really just around independence generally.
Yeah. Just as you were talking, I'm picturing a whole heap of people in your position or similar positions to you with their heads in their hands saying 9 people on an SRC and it works. How did they do that? It sounds like magic. There are some councils that have north of 60 people and shared roles and but still not knowing who the decision-making body is, and it's so frustrating for some people. And to add a real human impact layer to this, there are great staff members who've left the sector because the governance model doesn't support them in supporting good decisions. So there needs to be clear decision-making processes, and then the staff need to be empowered to support those decisions that are made by a student-led leadership body. What advice do you have for those sorts of people who are struggling with that model and looking at it as an uphill battle?
Yeah, look, and again, like this is a new model for us, so we're not sure how it's going to go. So I think it'll be a bit of trial and error. And look, I think on some level with student organizations, you have to appreciate there's going to be a bit of it's going to be a little bit messy, right? And I think as long as you sort of have you sort of section off the things that like are non-negotiable and have to be sort of set in stone, and that you don't want any messiness around that, that's fine. And then you have the sandpit, because I think that whole thing for students is that learning that they have in sort of, experimenting, failing, so spaces to fail safely, I think is really important for students in terms of that learning and that growth. But my coming back to your question, what would be my feedback to, look, I think coming back to your first question, right? Like, what does a modern student organization look like? It doesn't look like that anymore because students don't have, okay, so which 60 students are you having? Like, is it the same 60 students? Like, are you seeing the same sort of people every year, right? Like, and what are the voices you're not hearing, right? I think that's the question you really need to ask. What are the student voices we're not hearing and we're not including? So in my view, again, it's about having modern structures which allow students to engage at a time and a way that sort of, is easy for them. You want to make that process as easy as possible for students to be able to contribute. So again, in my view, it's really at that grassroots level. And it's also about having some hard conversations, I think, particularly with activist folks around like, what do you need as an activist? Do you need to be on SRC, or do you need some support and resources to go and do activist work? And how can we include, how do we connect those two pieces together as well, right? Like, obviously you don't want them off doing their, like there needs to be some connection and mechanism for that connection to happen. But at the same time, you want them to be free to go and do activist work and not get bogged down in red tape of, attending meetings, right? So yeah, that would be my advice, is probably just start having some of those conversations, and look, potentially even doing a process that like what we went through, which is to do a citizens jury, right? Engage some students that are not normally involved in these sorts of things and ask them, like, what does good student voice look like?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And so many of us as humans shy away from the difficult conversations. And what we find is the longer we don't have them, the more difficult they get. And those 60 students that are the same, or the same, an avatar of some exemplar, politically motivated, noisy student leader, you're right, we're missing the silent majority in a lot of cases here. And it's sometimes because of that. So while we don't want to break the student advocacy and representation model that a student union from 150, 200 years ago overseas represents, that it's, we are fighting for the rights of students. We're here to learn, we're here to grow. Let's find a way that we can do that, do that in as streamlined as way as possible. But we don't necessarily want the politically minded people who become noisy and then become self-interested, and it's more about me and furthering my political career than furthering the outcomes for students in general.
Yeah, agreed. And look, one final thing I'm going to say too is I feel like universities are also guilty of this thing too. Like, I think we've also had structures which haven't changed for very long periods of time. Like, we've played around the edges. But I think there's like, I think with AI now, like I think universities are going to be forced to change pretty dramatically over the next decade. And I think like now is probably the time for student unions to be asking this question: how do we change? Universities are going to be changing as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's critical. So let's look through the process of change now. And there's kind of two parts that I want to explore here. What were some parts in the process? And Nathan, this might be a point for you to jump in on again. From a risk management perspective, where were parts of the process, or what parts of the process did we go through where it could have fallen apart? Where do you think there were some risky forks in the road where the process could have stalled, or even been derailed to some extent?
I think the biggest risk was, whenever you're doing this type of work, is the differing of opinions. So how do we engage people and keep them engaged? So how do we ensure that they're listened to, that their voice is coming across, but that their voice is actually being shown in the documentation and the approach that we're putting together. So at any time, this could have very quickly fallen over or been delayed significantly if everyone was not engaged in a really positive way. When you're creating constitutions, election regulations, guidelines, and things are being written on paper or online about how you're going to do something, that's there for everyone to see. It's there for forever. And the last thing you want is somebody feeling that it's not right and then advocating for it to be taken down. With the sector is small. We've gone to other clients who've spoken about Western Sydney University and the student union, and they've said, "Oh, I've heard you guys are doing this. I've heard feedback of the breakup of the board, or what the SRC is going to look like," and they've heard that through other channels. And despite that, we've been able to keep everyone on track and everyone engaged. I think it's been great to be able to develop it right from scratch. So be there from the beginnings all the way to the end. So we've got that context, that understanding, the relationships with the individuals as we've gone through. So that's been incredibly helpful. To start that right at the end, let's just say we went into the process and a lot of this had happened and we were there and things were starting to fall apart because we hadn't been there from the start. I think would have been incredibly difficult to bring back on track. But it's been a long process, a year and a half, I think, Richard, perhaps 2 years for yourself. But that slow build, that engagement, that growth that we've gone through has been incredibly important. And everyone understands the learning cycle where you kick something off and then it goes down to that pit and starts creeping up. Well, it's about managing it when it gets to that pit of understanding. And we've done that through the education piece, the regular weekly updates that we've all come to, the openness with listening to ideas and unpacking that has been incredibly important to keep things on track and keep things going in the right direction. But also the narrative has been, well, this is what we're doing now, but we'll continue to listen. We will continue to evolve. We'll continue to grow as the union kicks off. So I think that's what's kept things going and kept them from being derailed. There's certainly been times where there has been challenges, but it's about getting the right people in the room and giving the right message across to them to ensure that they've been engaged. So Richard will attest to this. There has been times where we thought this conversation is going to be a really difficult conversation. We're not sure where this is going to go. At the end of today, we'll have to come back and re-strategize about what the direction we take coming from this meeting. But due to the approach and the engagement of the students as well, and the care of the students in that group have been just fantastic. A lot of care for the community and not just for themselves. So they've been able to come in and also listen and also engage and also learn through the process. Governance is a really difficult space. It's hard enough for someone in their 50s, 60s, 70s who's gone through a life of work and engagement to understand the rules of good governance. And often we're talking to people who may not even have studied or understand what governance even means from a board perspective. And all they want to do is, I just want to make change. I just want to make positive change. And I just want to go and assist people and teaching them the rules and the support and how to engage properly with good governance, and how that helps them shape their ideas, helps them get the ideas across better. That's what I've seen has been really positive through this process, giving them those tools to be able to articulate their challenges, but then get to a spot where they're happy with what they've put forward.
Mitigating factors to all of those points where it could have gone off the rails is obviously the relationship with the university being strong and the VC being right behind this. So right at the top, and even now with the reps from the uni that have seats on the board, they're at the right level. They're senior decision makers within the university, and they have a role to play in advising or guiding, assisting the VC and university's board of trustees. So it's really important that they're there. So that relationship obviously helped, as did the transparency. It meant that any time you went into those difficult discussions, it sounds like everyone knew, and we were able to be speaking openly, and everyone knew that based on past behavior, there's no hidden agendas here. There's no ulterior motives. We're on the same page, and we're all about what is the best outcome for students now, and especially given the diversity of the student population at Western, it's so important that we had that. So the flip side then, Richard, where do you think might be some of the decision points or some of the key parts to the process that really enabled it to stay on track or really added value to it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I might just take a step back and answer just to sort of dovetail into Nathan's response around where could it have been derailed. Look, I think the other thing we need to acknowledge is that we were doing this work, and we're continuing to do this work in the midst of one of the most significant restructures in the university's history going on. So I think we're now up to our third iteration of negotiating shared services schedules for our SLA, because a lot of the staff that we had originally negotiated with left, new staff coming on board, changes to resourcing, like all this stuff was going on. So if we're talking about things being derailed, like that stuff was really tricky. I think the only thing that kept it sort of going was the relationships that we had with a lot of those areas, and the goodwill that was there, particularly coming from the VC to sort of say, we're here to support this structure, so we just need to make it work. So I think that sort of kept it going. So sorry, Michael, what was your actual question?
Oh, and then the flip side of that is, where do you think there were some key decision points or activities in the project that kicked it along in the right direction?
Yeah. Um, I think coming back to your point around transparency, and I think everyone's, whilst we've probably got some views or ideas about things, it's not about going in with particular agenda. So I think, when you're going in and having discussions with students around, design aspects or, decisions that you need to make, like you might go in with some recommendations or argue a point around, like, I'll give you a really good example. Like, it was a sticking point to begin with, was setting the entity up as a controlled entity of the university initially, right? Like, and I think the point was that we would do that initially. The idea is in the future we would transition away from that. That was a tricky thing for the student reps to agree to, because I mean the whole thing was about independence, right? But I think it's about going in and having those transparent conversations around why that might be a good idea, particularly if we're talking about sort of setting it up for success, the borrowing some of the university's governance support structures, the fact that you've got university staff that need to feel comfortable transitioning across. I think once you have those conversations, they get it. They will understand it. So I
Yeah.
think whilst we sometimes shy away and we just make decisions because we don't want to have those difficult conversations. We need to do it in a really meaningful way, rather than just making a decision and getting students to rubber stamp it. Actually do meaningful consultation with them, because I think if you can't convince them, well, then maybe it's a bad idea anyway, right?
Yeah, that was so important that we had those conversations early, as you said. And because of the level of transparency in the whole project, we had no level of discomfort in having those discussions. So I remember standing in a lecture theatre full of staff who were genuinely, openly or subconsciously concerned about their jobs. And so then to be able to have a really open conversation to talk, and then, like, that is difficult to talk about the
Mm.
relationship that they've got and all of the service level agreements that now the union's able to establish with the board because of the fact it's a controlled entity. That set their minds at ease. But the same thing then with students, to just be able to say controlled entity sounds really scary. Let's actually unpack what that means in the Corporations Act, because it's a public company limited by guarantee. But let's also unpack what that means from a financial perspective. So who manages the finances? Are they managed by the university? Are they going to be managed by the union? But what does controlled entity mean in practice, was where
Yeah.
that a lot of that benchmarking work became so important, because we don't have a situation where the university wants to control a separate entity. It's called a controlled entity because that's the structure. But in reality, it's protective control, because we've also seen situations where that doesn't exist, where we've seen student associations fall over because the university can't step in and help because of the separation separation in structure, and because they're member-led organisations controlled by students. The cynic in me thinks, yeah, that can also be a good excuse for the university sit back and say, oh, look at that, we can't help, sorry, and watch them fail. But we've got a structure now where that's not a genuine risk at Western because of the way that it's set up.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think it's really, again, it comes back to some of the other points that we made earlier, on both the university and the student side, to acknowledge that this is a symbiotic relationship, right? Like, and that you need to be able to work together. And it's not to say that, you shy away from the role as being advocates for students and advocating for, like, to ensure that the university is doing the things it needs to do. But at the same time, it's about sort of acknowledging that, that there needs to be work that's done together. The union can't exist without the university, and in my view, it's also about like getting the university to acknowledge that the functions and the services that the union provides is really important too, and then wanting to be bought into the success of those functions and that model as well.
Mm. So to wrap up, I think that it's worth reflecting on the strength of your leadership in this role, Richard, not only through the transition, but with your time in the sector, and the genuine concern that you have for student leaders. And that has given you what I'll call wisdom. Wisdom is kind of knowledge through the experiences that you've been through, and intuition, because you kind of learn very quickly to take steps in the right direction and make the right decisions. So I'm really interested for you to wrap up by telling or sharing with us what your vision for Western Sydney University Student Union is in some time in the future. I've had the privilege of having you unpack this a little bit in some of the work that we've done together, but I'm really interested for you to share that with the world more broadly.
Yeah, look, I would say that my vision's probably there's some short-term sort of, I think, goals I would like to see the student union achieve, and then some longer-term ones. So the shorter-term stuff is really around, comes again, we're sort of touching on a lot of the stuff we've already talked about, demonstrating good governance, and I think that that's really, really important to sort of demonstrate to the university that they can that there's a level of trust, that the organization is doing the things that it needs to do appropriately. Again, acknowledging, sort of all the history and baggage that comes along with student organizations. Again, like I think that there is already a level of trust from the university, but I think it's just really demonstrating that. So I think the union needs to really demonstrate that it is, demonstrating good governance along that journey. I think obviously, the promotion and the brand, I think is really important now to sort of get that out to students, to sort of say the student union is here and this is what it does and this is how you can get involved. Because I mean, a union's only ever as powerful as the students that are involved in it. So I think that that's going to be a really big job for the student union now, is to sort of be able to do an effective communications and promotion strategy and effectively engage students in the various things that it's doing. And I think longer term, it comes back to some of the services that we were talking about earlier. I would love to see, my vision for the union is to be a really effective advocate for students around not just internal misconduct matters, but more broadly. I'd like to see Western Sydney University Student Union being a beacon in the sector as a strong model that other organisations or other institutions can adopt potentially, if not the whole thing, maybe parts of it that might be useful. And again, acknowledging context of different universities and everything else. It's not to say that you can just pick something up and move it completely, but there might be some elements or some principles that you might sort of take in terms of our approach that might be applicable somewhere else. I think ultimately for us as well, it's really about bringing the values. That I think that's actually the most important thing, the values and the culture that a student union can bring to other functions and services within the university, whether that's directly through the university delivering those functions, or whether it's influencing the way that the university is delivering those things to students. So ultimately, if we go back to the purpose of the student union, it's around, creating a fantastic experience for our students. It's about inclusion. It's about all these things. Whether the union's doing that directly or advocating for those let that to happen somewhere else, that's, I think, the level that's the level of the way that you want to gauge the success of the model. That would be my vision, I guess.
Was it Truman who said it's amazing what you can achieve when you don't care who gets the credit? Somebody said that. Yeah, great. Yeah, very powerful stuff. So here's to all of that coming true and more. So final question for both of you. Nathan, you can go first, and then Richard, you can wrap it up. What's the one piece of advice that you'd give to anyone else in the sector who's considering going through any sort of shift like we've been through?
The one piece of advice would be to don't rush the process. Ensure that you're encapsulating everything that needs to be done, and don't skip the important parts of the engagement, the getting the right processes in place, the knowledge of students, the knowledge of all the stakeholders, bringing people together always creates better results. So that'd be it.
Good advice. What about you, Richard?
Look, I'd concur with Nathan. I think sometimes the journey is just as important as the destination, and I think you getting that right is really important. I think the other thing I would say is don't feel that you have to do it all yourself. There are consultants like you guys out there, there are experts that can assist with a lot of this, and sometimes actually really useful, even if you feel that you've got the expertise in-house, is to get someone independent and external to assist with some of that. I think is really, really important. And then we've got such fantastic network through SAN and through other like to get advice from different, between myself and lots of other people that are working across the sector, we've got that cumulative years of experience and knowledge. So draw on that, I think, is really important. Have those conversations. But I might finish off by saying, that like proper, transparent consultation with students, and not being fixed on what the outcome needs to be, but more fixed on the process in terms of how you get there. That's probably the most important thing.
Great advice. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's been a privilege to have this conversation, and it's been wonderful to work with you, Richard, through the last few years to get to this point. It's always great, and it's always so refreshing and rewarding to be able to see the end result start. And now, like we've talked about it, it's kind of like a seed that's starting to sprout, and it's so exciting to watch what it's going to become and the impact that it's going to be able to have in the sector. So congratulations. Thank you for joining me. And to all of our listeners, I look forward to catching up with you again next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.